At the heart of this high-tech trade dispute between two Asian powerhouses are people like Lee Chun-shik. He's among a dwindling number of South Korean survivors who were forced into labour by Japan during World War II. In October of last year, South Korea's top court upheld an order for Japan's Nippon Steel to pay compensation to forced labourers. That landmark ruling triggered a bitter dispute between the two countries about how to deal with further demands from victims of forced labour. As the spat over history escalated, Japan retaliated with an unprecedented move on trade, announcing it would be restricting exports of highly specialised equipment needed to make semiconductors and computer displays. The measure, designed to hurt South Korea's high-tech industry, prompted a furious response from Seoul. Not only does Japan's measure damage the economic relationship between our countries, but it's also expected to grossly affect the World Trade Order and corporations in third-party countries. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe denies accusations he's using business as a bargaining chip for dealing with his country's history. We did not mix up historical issues with those of trade. The issue of former civilian workers is not an historical issue. It's about whether to keep the promise between countries under international law. The export restrictions could cause months of delays in production processes, putting South Korean tech giants like Samsung and LG under major pressure. South Korea has already launched a complaint with the World Trade Organization and says it's not ruling out retaliating with countermeasures of its own, a move that would expose a further crack in already fragile global trade relationships.
And our senior business editor, Ben Fazulin, is following this story for us. Ben, put this into perspective for us. How much of an impact could this have on global trade?
Well, basically, it's going to slow things down. It won't immediately have an effect on products going out to consumers, but it will slow down the process. Japan is basically burying South Korean importers in paperwork. It's going to be a lot harder for them to get their hands on the material they need to make their semiconductors and their chips. Officials reckon it could slow trade by several months, and the top chip makers and memory chip makers are all in South Korea. They supply not only other companies within South Korea and Japan, so it'll hurt both sides, but also the US, like Apple, Huawei, and China. So this is pulling in a whole lot of different economies, which are already all involved in this trade war. And if there is a tit-for-tat response from South Korea, which looks likely, then this whole thing could explode.
OK, so let's talk about the effect on consumers. If this dispute does drag on, could it become more difficult for people to get their hands on a Samsung phone, say?
In the short term, no. Samsung says it has months of stockpiles. The main chip makers also say they're fine in the short term. The smaller producers it could be the death of them. They're already facing the sector's biggest downturn ever. And if neither side backs down, we're hearing from South Korea this is only the beginning. Japan has been telling reporters that it could actually expand these curbs. Then, yeah, it's going to hurt production. It's going to hurt a whole lot of countries, and consumers could also be hurt here. Analysts say the whole process of semiconducting and chip making could be in big trouble. Up to 90% of the three materials used in chip making come from Japan. So these big chip makers are going to be struggling to find someone else to supply them.
OK, and how does all this change the dynamic in the current global trade war?
This is where it gets really interesting. The reason that Japan gives for curbing these exports is national security. Have you heard that before?
I have not.
Well, Mr. Trump was using that exact reasoning for his curbing of exports when it comes to the trade war with Mexico as well. And Shinzo Abe, the Japanese leader, is great friends, plays golf with Mr. Trump. And those two guys get along well, but he doesn't get along too well with South Korea, on the other hand. And this whole dispute pits the two of them, South Korea and Japan, against each other when a whole global trade war is raging on. And Trump really needs both of them in the fight against China.
OK, Ben Fazulin, thanks so much for clarifying all of that for us.